Hello, so as you can see, this week's general lesson that we're offering is on French food, and there is a bit of a food and culture quiz in the second half of the PowerPoint video. So this PowerPoint is absolutely ideal for Year 8 who've been working on the topic of food and drink and health and fitness a bit more recently, and also Year 9 who have been working on the topic of health and fitness too. But that's not to say it's irrelevant for Year 7 and 10, because it is a very general lesson, because I'm trying to pop up something a bit more general as well each week, a bit more interesting, a bit more culturally based. Okay, so hopefully you will learn a little bit about French food, traditions, meals that you didn't know before. There's a video throughout the PowerPoint as well, but I'll explain that when I get to it. And there's a quiz at the end. So if you are going to take any notes, your title is La nourriture en France, which is food in France. Okay, so I'm going to start with maybe 7 or 8 slides which offer some typical facts and bits of information about food in France, starting with le petit déjeuner, which we probably know is breakfast. A reminder to you as well that where the French can abbreviate, they will, and you might hear actually this being referred to as le petit déj as an abbreviation rather than the full word le petit déjeuner. So breakfast, le petit déjeuner. Okay, so I'm going to reveal all the facts because I'm not going to read everything out to you. I'll just pick out some of the different things, such as, did you know that croissants were actually from Austria and not France? Most people think they originate from France, but in fact, they started in Austria. And when Austria defeated Turkey, this is what inspired the name, because there is a crescent shape on the Turkish flag. There it is. And croissant actually means crescent. So there you go. And the French people typically will have a plain croissant or maybe a pain au chocolat for breakfast, or quite often just une tartine, which is bread and jam and butter. But what's very different is you will see the bread or the croissant being dipped into their coffee or into their drink. Okay, so le déjeuner, lunch, which is a bit strange because actually we've just learned that le petit déjeuner is breakfast. Déjeuner on its own is lunch. Petit déjeuner is actually little lunch, which is completely strange, but that's how they refer to these two meals of the day. Okay, so the biggest difference between lunch in France and lunch in England is that in France it's a bigger meal. As you can see there, there's usually a starter, a main course, there's usually a little dessert or a cheese course, okay? And it is, you can see that picture in the top right-hand corner, of school lunch in France. Yeah, you've got your drink, you've got some cheese, baguette, you've got fresh fruit for dessert, and you've got a main meal, and it's a longer meal of the day. In fact, it is very common for people in France to take 2 hours for lunch. I'm sure you've heard of the siesta in mainland Europe, in Spain, where shops close between maybe midday and 2 or sometimes even 3 o'clock, it says there. And that's because lunch is a bigger deal and it is a longer, more of a sit-down meal as a tradition. Okay, that doesn't mean everybody does that, but traditionally that's the way it is. Okay, and just a bit of vocabulary for you, particularly for Year 7, maybe 8, if you've not heard this expression. Bon appétit is what the French say to each other before they sit down to eat. It literally translates as good appetite, but you're saying enjoy your meal. Okay, next, bread, le pain. Okay, so we know how popular bread is in France, and I'm sure that we've heard of the main items of bread. There's lots of variations, but une baguette is the main one. So as you can see there, 10 billion baguettes each year produced in France, which is loads. What I think is really interesting here is that the ingredients of a baguette can only be these 3 ingredients: flour, yeast and salt, and that is law. That's quite interesting. That's quite strict, really, isn't it? Okay, a little bit more vocabulary for you, is that we might refer to bread rolls. In French, this is les petits pains, which literally means little breads, which I think does make sense. Cheese as well, le fromage, super big deal, as it says there in France. There you can see that there's officially 365 types of cheese, so maybe a different type of cheese for pretty much every day of the year. But apparently there's hundreds, loads and loads more variations, but officially it's 365. Okay, there's loads, I'm not going to read them out to you. You can pause and have a read of some of the many types of French cheese. There's a lovely picture there of some of the varieties of cheese, if you're a cheese lover, like me. Moving on. Okay, so la quiche, as I think we probably know, is a savoury tart. It's quite popular over here in England as well. Typical ingredients: eggs, cheese, bacon, particularly quiche Lorraine. Obviously, you can add whatever ingredients that you like, whether it's pepper, mushroom there, spinach, I suppose like pizza toppings really. And it's a dish that is eaten hot or cold. There's one picture. And there you have got another typically French dish, la ratatouille, just like that lovely film Ratatouille, the mouse, set in Paris. So ratatouille, do you know what it is? Have a little think before I reveal. It is a vegetable stew, and it actually comes from Nice, down in the south of France. Its full name, which you don't really hear it referred to as, is la ratatouille niçoise, and niçoise is anything that originates from Nice, really. So basically it's just loads of vegetables mixed together in a pan, and it's quite often served as a side dish, to be honest, with maybe a meat or a fish, and served with rice, or in France traditionally bread, baguette, just like cut up or ripped up in the middle of the table. And there's a picture of a typical looking ratatouille with loads of herbs and vegetables mixed in there. Okay, moving on to the French food items that everybody's heard of, but maybe aren't quite as widely eaten as people assume. Les escargots are snails. As you can see there, that's quite a lot of snails eaten each year in France. You're looking at 500 million snails eaten each year in France. That's the most typical snails dish there, cooked in garlic, parsley, butter, cooked in their shells. But I must point out, it's not a typical eat every night at home sort of thing. I think everybody thinks, oh, French food, snails, frogs' legs, which is coming up in a minute. But they're very much a delicacy and maybe more of a restaurant treat. Same with frogs' legs, les cuisses de grenouille. Frogs' legs are traditionally considered to be a delicacy. They're not eaten as regularly as snails, perhaps. And again, it's more of a restaurant food than at home. Some people say they taste like chicken, but there's not as much meat on them. That picture there of some frogs' legs, the quite skinny ones, to be honest. They're usually maybe a little bit more plump than that. And I suppose they are a little bit like a mixture between chicken and fish. If you've ever tried them, that's what most people would say there, actually. There is a very stereotypical French guy digging into his frog legs. Okay, so this next slide is about le goûter, which on previous slides, for year 8 and 9 especially, who focused on this topic, le goûter as a meal of the day actually means a snack. Okay, you sometimes hear it referred to as le 4 heures, so 4 o'clock. It's an afternoon snack, and it's for children. So there's some items of food there that a French child pupil might have as their goûter. So crêpes, croissants, brioche, cookies, maybe hot chocolate, particularly in the winter months. Une compote, so like a fruit puree, is a really typical French snack for children as well. Right then, moving on to le dîner, which is dinner or tea. Not going to get into a debate about that one. Let's call it the evening meal. Okay, and interestingly there in the top right hand corner you can see that French families, French people they do have their evening meal typically later than us in England, between 7:30 and 9 o'clock. Now traditionally in England our tea time is maybe more between 5, half 5 and 6, half 6. Again, every family is different. I'm not saying every single family eats that early over here and that late over there, but traditionally they do eat later over in France. Let's have a look at what they eat. La bouillabaisse, just to give you some pronunciation, but I'll let you read the details there. It's typically an absolutely beautiful fish, seafood soup / stew, really. Lovely if you like fish and seafood. Then you also have, more people have heard of this, the croque monsieur, which is just a little bit more than a typical cheese and ham toasty, including a lovely bechamel sauce, Gruyere, beautiful, beautiful. And next one, le boeuf bourguignon. So you might have heard of beef bourguignon, typically French dish, served in most French restaurants over here. I'll let you pause and read the details on that one. Have a look at that lovely slow cooked meat in that stew. And the last one is poulet provençal, chicken provençal, another sort of one pot chicken dish. You can see what it includes there, but lots of different flavours, typical of the south of France, in fact, on that one. Okay, moving. Wine. So firstly, the legal ages for drinking in France is either 16 or 18, depending on what the alcoholic drink is. It is 18 for the stronger, more alcoholic drinks. I think we know that France is famous for various wines, and it's maybe useful, interesting to point out now that celebration drink in France is pretty much always champagne, which of course is from France, the Champagne region. And I will just reveal a lovely quote there at the end from Alexandre Dumas, which I will let you read before I move on to. Just a few extra food facts here, actually, that might not have been mentioned in the previous 9 or 10 slides. So, stereotypical stuff and names and whatnot. Did you know that French people call English people les roast beef? This means roast beefs. They actually do use it as an insult. I wonder if you can have a little think about what wrongly, weirdly, we sometimes refer to French people as. And again, it's linked to what they eat, and it's frogs. So if you haven't heard that, it's going back a number of years now, it's completely strange. Frogs, French frogs, because of course traditionally they eat frogs' legs. Well, flip that on the other side, and French people sometimes refer to us English people as les roast beef. All very weird. And next one, it is common, certainly more common than it is here, to see rabbit or horse on a menu in France. Now, a traditional Christmas menu is not exactly the same as our turkey roast dinner. And obviously a lot of different people choose to do very different things over here for our traditional Christmas dinner, if you celebrate Christmas. Over in France, a traditional Christmas menu, first thing that always springs to my mind is oysters, les huîtres, snails, foie gras, smoked salmon, scallops, and champagne as a celebratory drink. And if you don't know what foie gras is, this is another French delicacy, which is a bit like a pate, but it's much more expensive and made in a way that is deemed quite cruel by many people. So you could do a little bit of research on that if you've never heard what foie gras is before. It is another French delicacy. They're a massive meat-eating country. Not everybody, but that's worth pointing out and maybe interesting to look up. And finally, interesting as well to note that desserts at home in France are a bit more healthy than what people might assume. There's lots of rich desserts over there, and tarts and cakes in patisserie windows, but actually at home it's typically fruit and yogurt. Not always, but on a daily basis it's typically yogurt or fruit. Okay, now at this point there is a video. I am not going to click it now because I can't do it without subjecting you to 3 minutes of adverts on this video. I can't figure out how to get about that, people. So I'm going to copy and paste the link just onto Frog Homeworks when I set this, so you'll see it if you scroll down on this when I've put it on as a bit of information. You'll see this link, and I've also prepared just a few questions along the way. So there's a really nice video. It's about 8 minutes long. Where I'd really love you to watch it. It's got English subtitles on it, as well as hearing genuine French people and Italians and Swiss people as well talking about French cuisine. It'd be great if you could listen and read it really well and list any typical French dishes that are mentioned. Have a think about what your own opinions are and what you might like to try sooner or later. And I've also prepared some of my own questions, like find the French for and stuff, which might be quite useful for some vocab building. So that's what this is about. It might be a good idea to even pause the video now, go to the link on Frog Homeworks and work your way through my questions. I've only prepared 15 questions that link with this quite short clip and see how you get on. Okay, so I'm going to move on through the food and culture PowerPoint now. Move on to our quiz. So I'm going to read the question. The questions are in English on this quiz, and then I will pretty much go through the answers straight away. So this is testing what you've learned, what you've absorbed from the information that I've been through for you. So name one typical breakfast food. Pause the video. Right, so you might have said plain croissant, pain au chocolat, milky drink perhaps, coffee. You might have said baguette for bread. You might have remembered the word tartine that I mentioned earlier in the information PowerPoint. Question 2. Question 2. How do you say lunch in French? Quick think. It is le déjeuner. So that is a right or wrong answer, that one. Lunch is le déjeuner. Okay, number 3, French children typically snack on. There was a huge list of food and drink items that the French children could potentially consume for their goûter. Do you remember what they were? Okay, it was crêpe, which is pancakes, croissant, brioche. Those 2 words don't translate because they're French words that we use in English as well. Cookies. So les biscuits, cookies, I suppose, or even chocolat chaud, hot chocolate. And I added one, which was a fruit puree, une compote, which is quite popular snack for French children for le goûter. Okay, question 4. Where does the word croissant come from? Do you remember that? It was the shape of a crescent, which of course is the shape of an actual croissant. And I'm sure you can remember that I mentioned it was actually inspired from the Turkish flag. And so you can look back. It was the very first slide actually when we were talking about breakfast. Number 5, how many snails do the French eat per year? It was quite a lot. It was ridiculous. It was 500 million snails per year. However, I suppose the typical portion of snails would be like between 6 and 8. So it's not like maybe as bad as it seems, but it's quite a lot. 500 million. What are little bread rolls called in French? Can we remember? And it literally translated as little breads, and it was les petits pains. Well done if you got that. 7. How many cheeses are officially produced in France? However, remember that people say that there are way more, hundreds more, in fact, than the official number, which is 365. Question 8, sorry, I've skipped past that super quick, and now I'm on to a duplicated one, which was my fault. Question 8, what is the name that the French give to their English? That's the question I've just whizzed over by accident. Sorry about that. Do you remember? The name the French, stereotypically, very weirdly, based on what apparently we eat all the time, it was le roast beef. And this question I should have skipped over because this one is up here twice. Which was more popular, snails or frog's legs? I think we've had that before, haven't we? But if not, I would say that the more popular one was snails, because we read earlier in the PowerPoint that there were 500 million snails consumed each year, and it said for frog's legs, not that many people actually eat them regularly, but they're both delicacies. Okay, so that's question 9 and 10. Okay, didn't double click there, much better. 2 typical foods that the French might have at Christmas. Okay, maybe pause, have a think. Right, so the first thing is oysters, raw oysters, snails, escargot, foie gras, which we talked a little bit about, smoked salmon, so saumon fumé, scallops, and champagne to drink. Now, that's not to say that no families over there do have sort of turkey or ham, but they are the traditional, just a few of the traditional French Christmas menu items. 11. Here we go. I knew this question was on here twice. What's more popular? We've already mentioned that this one was snails. Right, question 12. What is the drinking age in France? Do you remember that fact? It was 16 or 18, depending on the drink. So 18 for the stronger alcoholic beverages. Can you, question 13, name 3 typical French meals? Okay, you've got loads to choose from, but if you are just working from the PowerPoint, the information that we've been through in this little session, you might mention bouillabaisse, the fish and seafood stew. You might mention croque monsieur, the cheese and ham toasted sandwich with an edge, much nicer than just a toasty over here. Bœuf bourguignon, beef bourguignon, or you might mention chicken provençal, poulet provençal. There's obviously loads more of typical French meal. Cassoulet, which is like a duck and a sausage bean stew, another one-pot type stew. Oh, there's loads. So you could look up endless list of typical French meals, but there you go. They were the 4 that were mentioned in the dinner, the evening meal, le dîner section. Right, vocab check. What do the French say to each other before they eat? Traditional, we might say, have a nice meal, enjoy your meal. And that in French is bon appétit. I think you find bon appétit quite widely said in England as well. People just tend to know bon appétit, and it means good appetite or enjoy your meal. Okay, last question is 15. How long do the French usually have for lunch? Remember, French for lunch is le déjeuner. It's much, much longer, bigger deal than it is over here. And the standard time, it said people can take up to 2 hours. It even said up to 3, didn't it? But 2 hours is a bit more normal for lunch. And the reason for that is that it's a longer meal, consisting of a starter, a main, and a dessert. And a lot of people do, depending on what the jobs are, obviously, go home for lunch and sit down and have that longer meal. Again, not everybody, because if you're working in like an emergency service or something, you can't just obviously shut shop. But if it's possible, lots of shops, post office, bank, they can close for a couple of hours for lunch, but then they tend to be open later. So you do kind of have to make up for it. Okay, so lots of different interesting facts, bits of information about the French food and drink culture in this lesson. Please don't forget that link to the video, which is going to be on Frog Homeworks for you if you just scroll down, with some linked comprehension questions and vocabulary questions as well, such as what's the French for? Can you find the French for? Any work that you do on this, feel free to submit it in the share folder on the Frog Learning platform. Okay, merci, au revoir.